Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's Last Post ceremony. My name is Emily Hiles, and joining us today from the Royal Australian Air Force is aircraft woman Petra Delacourt. This evening, we're honoured to acknowledge Admiral Michael Gilday, Chief of Naval Operations, United States Navy, and Mrs. Linda Gilday, accompanied by Vice Admiral Mark Hammond, Chief of Navy, and Mrs. Jodie Hammond. Lieutenant General Charles Stickland, United Kingdom Chief of Joint Operations, accompanied by Lieutenant General Greg Bilton, Chief of Joint Operations, and their accompanying delegation. We're also honoured to acknowledge the presence of Ms. Kim Feit and Mr. Jim Griffith, and other members of the US Department of Defence delegation, accompanied by Mr. Rob Toogan of the Australian Department of Defence. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that love and support them. The live stream of this ceremony is made possible by the Returned and Services League of Australia and the RSL and Services Club Association. We welcome members who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the pool of reflection by visitors to the memorial. If you're able, please stand and join in singing the national anthem. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where family and friends could mourn loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight, we will read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 103,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and on operations for more than a century. But first, we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths and floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the pool of reflection.
Today we remember and pay tribute to Sergeant George David Challis. George Challis was born on the 9th of February 1981 in the town of Cleveland, Tasmania, the first of 8 children to be born to Michael and Margaret Challis. He went to school in Launceston and was a member of the cadets at his high school, serving for 3 years. Challis was an accomplished Australian rules footballer, starting for the Launceston Football Club and representing the Tasmanian state team in 3 successive state championships, from 1909 to 1911. In 1912, he was lured to the Victorian Football League, joining the Carlton Football Club. Before too long, he was regarded as one of Carlton's most brilliant players. He was unfortunate to miss Carlton's grand final triumph in 1914 due to injury. He also worked as a clerk in the audit branch of the railway department. When war broke out in 1914, Challis was keen to enlist. "This is a fine country, this Australia of ours," he said, "and it is worth fighting for, so I'm going into khaki." To his surprise, he was rejected due to his overlapping toes. He returned to football for the 1915 season and was named amongst the best players for Carlton in their grand final triumph over Collingwood. It would be the last game of the AFL that he would play. After 3 rejections, Challis was accepted into the Australian Imperial Force in August 1915 and was soon promoted to sergeant. He declined an opportunity to become an officer, as it would have delayed his departure for service, as he intended on reaching the front as soon as possible. He embarked for active service on the transport ship Ulysses in October and arrived in Zaytun training camp in Egypt in February 1916, where he joined the 58th Battalion. Breaks in training provided an opportunity for football games to be played under the Egyptian sun, and Challis proved himself to be a valuable asset. The 58th Battalion was set to the Western Front in France, arriving in Marseille in June 1916. Challis spent his first days in France sightseeing and mingling with locals, but was soon on his way to the front. On the night of the 10th of July, Challis and his battalion were marched out to the front lines in northern France. Nearly 2 years after Challis was first rejected from the army, he had made it to the battlefield. The Australian 5th Division, to which the 58th Battalion belonged, was the Forbay sector of the front near a small village named Fromelles. On the 15th of July, German forces raided the 58th Battalion trenches under the protection of an extremely violent concentration of artillery and trench mortars. Challis was killed when a German shell landed in his trench. His remains had to be collected by fellow soldiers in a blanket. He was 25 years old. Challis was a popular figure in the 58th Battalion. Letters from soldiers soon began appearing in Australian newspapers, lamenting the loss of their friend. "I was always fond of him, to be every inch of a man," one companion wrote. "Always willing, and always what a real gentleman should be. On the battlefield, he was just as much, if not more, a gentleman. Never will I forget one of my best pals, George Challis." Newspaper tributes to Challis from family members read, "While one is loved, there is no death at all, and he sleeps not in his native land, ever in remembrance." George Challis is buried at Rue Petillon Military Cemetery in Forbay, France. His epitaph, chosen by his parents, reads, "Thou, death divides, fond memories breed." Sergeant George David Challis is listed on the Roll of Honour on my right. one of more than 62,000 Australians who died while serving in the First World War. His photograph is displayed today beside the pool of reflection. This is but one of many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Sergeant George David Challis, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in hope of a better world.
Please stand for the reading of the ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them.
Lest we forget.
Lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Pozières or in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the last post ceremony. On behalf of our director, staff and volunteers, we thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial today and for your continued support of the Memorial's development project. We wish you all a very pleasant evening.